No one pays attention to a gate when it first goes up. It's just a few strips of chain-link fence, a rusty padlock, and a cheap plastic sign strung up with wire. But then the tomato plant on this side starts to wither, and the farmer on the other side, for the first time in his life, has to stand and watch what he planted slowly die because of a decision made not by a vote, but by arrogance masquerading as standards. This wasn't about tomatoes anymore. Or zoning lines. This was when an entire community realized, if we don't stop them today, tomorrow they'll fence off our very way of life. And so, a small gate, put up to divide, became the starting point of a rebellion, not with gunfire, but with seeds, the law, and unshakable resolve. My name is Mark Ryland, and before my life became all about tomatoes, I was a bridge engineer, the kind of guy who wore a hard hat, drank cold coffee, and believed every problem could be solved, with a straight edge and an inclinometer. Then COVID hit. I wasn't the only one booted from an office with a pink slip and a good luck pat on the back. But unlike a lot of folks, I didn't spend my days chugging beer or zoning out to video games. I stepped into the backyard, stared at a stretch of barren dirt where our dog used to do his business, and started digging. Every shovel of soil was a quiet punch back at the system that kicked me out. I planted a few tomatoes, then a couple, rows of kale. By the time the first season ended, I had more vegetables than my family could eat. My wife Kelly, an ER nurse who worked straight through the pandemic, suggested I take them to the local farmer's market. I laughed. She wasn't joking, so I gave it a shot. Sold out in 2 hours. People weren't just buying veggies. They were buying hope, proof that something could still grow in a world gone sideways. I called that plot the Victory Patch, and it saved me. I wasn't born a farmer, but I understood systems. Irrigation, rainwater harvesting, compost from restaurant scraps. I applied everything I knew. 3 restaurants came by weekly to pick up orders. Every day, neighbors would walk by and ask, "What are you using to grow that stuff?" No one complained. Not until Judith Harper showed up. Judith was new. White hair in a tight knot, a smile that never reached her eyes. She quickly became the new president of our HOA, Maple Glen Estates, a quiet retirement neighborhood where lawns are squares and a single fallen leaf triggers a community alert. At first, she just eyed my garden like it was a mildew stain on her silk blouse. I didn't pay attention. That was my mistake. The first warning came through the mailbox: excessive vegetation disrupting community aesthetics. I replied politely, attached photos of the well-maintained garden, drip irrigation system, and even a soil quality report from the county agricultural office. Silence. Then came the unauthorized commercial vehicle violation. It was the restaurant. Van that picked up produce every Wednesday, again, I replied. Provided proof. Explained that I wasn't breaking any rule. Silence again. I didn't realize back then, whether I was too naive or too busy planting, that Judith wasn't ignoring me. She was building a case, waiting for one clean strike to break me down. And that strike came on a June morning. I walked out to the garden like always. But instead of the buzz of bees, I heard the clink of metal. An 8-foot chain-link fence had gone up across my plot, cutting my garden in half like a blade through my chest. Barbed wire lined the top. At the center, a locked gate with a sign that read, HOA Zone, no trespassing. I froze. And then Judith appeared. Powder blue skirt, suit, smile colder than steel. "Good morning, Mr. Ryland. I trust you received the land use violation notice?" "Violation?" I asked, my voice dry as gravel. She pulled a folder from her briefcase. "You are operating an unauthorized commercial enterprise in a residential-only zone. Selling produce to restaurants qualifies as business. That's not permitted here." I couldn't speak. I had just lost 75% of my growing area, right before peak harvest. I had contracts worth over $50,000 with restaurants. Missed deliveries meant penalties. Worse, This was my family's livelihood. Judith left no room for doubt. You can apply for a special use permit. The fee is $10,000. You have 72 hours to file. If not, you must cease all operations immediately. Then she turned and walked off, like she'd just announced a bake sale, leaving me there with a fence through my heart. That night I sat surrounded by zoning maps, HOA bylaws, and land use codes. My hands trembled with rage. My heart is filled with fear. Kelly walked in, saw me, and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. They put up a fence, I told her. Cut us off. She sat beside me. No fear in her face, just fire in her eyes. Judith doesn't want to protect the neighborhood, Mark. She wants to own it. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I knew one thing. I wasn't growing vegetables just to eat. I was growing to live, and if they thought a cheap fence could bury all of that, then they had no idea who they were messing with. I didn't sleep. My mind was filled with that fence and its padlock, a declaration of war in metal. The piece of land on the other side, where I'd planted my prized Cherokee purple tomatoes, was now cut off from the irrigation system. June. In our state is as hot as a kiln. 3 days without water, and those tomatoes would be shriveled corpses. And there I stood, locked out of my own land. Cutting the fence? I thought about it, but I'm not stupid. That would hand HOA the ammunition. They'd need to sue me back. I needed another way, a legal way, a way that would make Judith tear down the fence with her own hands. I rigged a makeshift hose from my side, trying to stretch it as far as I could, but it was like bailing water from a sinking ship with a spoon. The plants started wilting, and when I called the restaurants to update them, my voice nearly broke. I'm not sure I'll make this season's delivery. The first one paused, then said, Mark, don't quit. You're not just growing tomatoes, you're growing in trust. That hit me deeper than any fence ever could. Kelly wasn't about to sit still. She tore through the internet, called up old classmates, and spent all night digging through public records. The next morning, while I was still in the garden, she placed her laptop on the kitchen table and said, I know what she wants. On C. Screen was a photo of Judith having lunch with a real estate developer, not once, but 3 times over the past month. This guy specializes in buying up residential plots and flipping them into commercial centers. The catch is, he needs a few adjacent lots to make it work. Guess where your land sits? Right next to the undeveloped woods. Prime access for any new development. Kelly went on. She doesn't just want you to shut down the garden. She's trying to force you to sell, for cheap. I didn't even have time to respond before there was a knock at the door. It was Leah, a freelance reporter who lived a few houses down. Camera slung around her neck, a serious look on her face. I saw the fence go up the other day. Mind if we talk? I invited her in, not knowing then that Leah was about to change everything. Mark, you're not alone, she said, flipping open her laptop. I've been tracking Judith for over 6 months. This isn't the first time she's put up a fence to box someone out. She pulled up the 2020 zoning map. The tail end of my garden was inside an urban agriculture zone, designated by the city to allow small-scale commercial growing. From the city's standpoint, you're not breaking any rules. This is all HOA overreach. Then she zoomed in on the map, right at the gate where the fence was anchored, highlighting a tiny 10x10 FT parcel. The owner's name? Helen Dunbar. I checked. She passed away 3 months ago. No known heirs. That lot is headed for a public auction. Kelly and I exchanged looks. Leah just smiled. If you can buy that plot, everything changes. I couldn't breathe, not from fear, but from that flicker of hope in the middle of the chaos. Helene Dunbar. That name was stranger to me than the illegal fence that went up the day before. I need to know more about her, I said. Leah nodded. I thought the same, because I believe she left that land there for a reason. The story was no longer simple. Judith hadn't just erected a fence. She'd reignited an old battle, and I had unknowingly stepped into the shoes of someone who once stood their ground in the same war. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear anymore, but because now I know I'd found the gap in their fence, and this time, I wouldn't just water plants. I would fight. The next morning, I arrived at the county records office before they even opened. My goal? To learn everything I could about Helen Dunbar, the former owner of that 10-10 FT plot where the HOA had installed their gate. The older clerk, Harriet, gave me a knowing look when I said it had to do with the HOA. Oh, Harper again, huh? She sighed, pulling out a faded folder from the archives. This is the interesting bit you'll want. Helen's full name was Helen Nellie Dunbar, one of the founding residents of Maple Glen, more than 40 years ago, when the neighborhood was still a quiet stretch of suburbia surrounded by grasslands and trees. Not only was she a pioneer in organic gardening, she was also a civil rights attorney who had sued the HOA 3 times and won every time. I felt goosebumps as I read through it. In 1995, she filed a lawsuit against the previous HOA board for trying to ban residents from growing crops, citing aesthetic impact. The court ruled in her favor. In the ruling, there was this line: "From this day forward, any resident owning land within the district prior to 1985 shall have the right to engage in small-scale commercial agriculture. The HOA shall not interfere." But that wasn't all. She had also secured something incredibly rare: a perpetual easement, a forever granted legal right to access and use HOA-controlled land for agricultural purposes. I jolted upright when I saw the original survey map attached to the file. That tiny parcel of land, exactly where the HOA had planted their gate, had been carved out as a separate lot in 1997. Helen had done it on purpose. It was like placing a silent queen on a chessboard, quiet, unassuming, but ready to checkmate when the time was right. That evening, Leah stopped by the house. When I told her everything, her eyes lit up. "Don't you get it, Mark?" she said. Helen knew they'd come back. She left that parcel behind as a legal trap, and Judith Harper just walked straight into it. She pulled out her laptop. "And get this, the auction for that plot is scheduled for next week." I nodded. "I'm buying it. Even if I have to sell all my equipment, I will." Leah smiled. "You're not doing this alone." The next morning, I called the 3 restaurants I regularly supplied produce to. When I explained what had happened, the fence, the violations, the auction, none of them hesitated. "We'll chip in," Tom from the green table said. "Think of it as prepaying for the season." Maria from Bella Vista even wired the funds during the call. That night, I sat with Kelly in the kitchen. I held the official auction notice while she stared at me intently. "You're betting everything on a piece of land smaller than our bathroom." I nodded. "But honey, it's not just land, it's the key." Kelly quietly poured a glass of wine. "Then go win." 7 days later, I walked into the county auction room like it was a battlefield. I wore an old button-down, the watch Kelly gave me 10 years ago, and in my pocket, $20,000, hard-earned, honest money, collected with sweat, tears, and the trust of an entire community. Judith Harper was already there. Fresh suit, her private attorney beside her, looking smug as if she were trophy hunting. I stood across the room. No lawyer, no consultant, just reason and a righteous claim. Lot 47B, 10 square feet, starting bid, $5,000, $6,000. Her lawyer called out. "7, I replied. 8, 10. Judith started to frown. 12, 14. I saw her begin to whisper, visibly anxious, and when I called out, 15,000. The room fell silent. 3 seconds later, "Sold to Mr. Ryland." I didn't smile. I just looked at Judith, her face pale as unpainted drywall. In my hand was the deed to the property, complete with a powerful clause. Includes perpetual agricultural easement as granted under ruling XYZ 1995. A clean, final knockout. I walked out of the building and called Kelly. "I just bought the golden key. the one that not only unlocks their gate, but locks down their entire plan. I didn't know exactly what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure. Their fence had just become the gateway to my counterattack. I didn't go home right after the auction. I drove straight to the newly acquired lot, that tiny 10 by 10 foot piece of land, where the HOA had installed their gate like they were kings of the land. I stood there, looking at the locked gate that had once split my garden in two. Then reached into my pocket and pulled out a new padlock. Click. I locked it, this time with full legal ownership on my side. An hour later, Harper showed up. She brought along the HOA's maintenance crew, her face twisted like she'd just smelled cow manure at a 5-star French restaurant. "We need access to inspect the HOA irrigation system," she said, her voice sharp as a box cutter. "Sorry, this is private property," I replied, calmly holding up the deed like a red card. Her face flushed. "You can't lock the gate. This is under HOA maintenance jurisdiction." I smiled sweetly, like pouring syrup. "Oh, I'm happy to negotiate. According to county guidelines, the current easement usage fee is $100 a month." "What?" "I can print the invoice right here if you'd like," I said. "Or if you prefer, we can negotiate a simpler solution, remove the fence." She turned and stomped off like someone doused her in ice water at a farmer's market. I knew she wouldn't give up that easily, but I wasn't the same Mark anymore either. That evening, I returned to the city planning office. The receptionist, Betty, silver-haired, glasses, and a retired civil engineer, recognized me from my earlier zoning dispute filings. I asked a simple question. Did the HOA ever file for a permit to build that fence? Betty typed into the system, paused, and raised an eyebrow. No record, no permit, and you know, any fence over 6 feet tall or crossing property lines needs approval. I grinned. Looks like Mrs. Harper conveniently forgot that. Betty printed me a copy of the ordinance, highlighting the section that read, "Violations may incur fines up to $500 per day for unauthorized construction." That night, I called Leah. "You want a headline? I've got one for you." The next day, Leah published her first article. Headline: HOA builds illegal fence, cuts off community farm. The story included photos of the fence, legal citations, and most importantly, a map showing that the gate sat on private property. Mine. The article spread like wildfire. That same afternoon, 3 of my neighbors stopped by. Mrs. Donovan brought honey-glazed bread and whispered, "We're behind you." Mr. Peterson showed up with an apple pie, muttering, "She's been a problem in this neighborhood too long." The Garcia family brought enchiladas and a group hug. I was no longer just the unemployed engineer growing tomatoes. I was the first guy to lock the HOA out of their own gate. But I also knew, when a wounded animal feels cornered, it strikes blindly. And I was right. The next day, I received a notice from the County Environmental Department. The reason? Suspected contamination of water sources due to agricultural activity. I laughed so hard Kelly came running from the kitchen. "What's going on?" I held up the paper. "Judith just played her final card. And this one's going to backfire. Because I farm completely organic. I keep records of every fertilizer, water usage, and soil test. And the best part? The inspector assigned used to be my dad's friend. When he arrived, he shook my hand and said, 'Jim Ryland's boy, I went to school with your dad.' I gave him the full tour, irrigation, organic certifications, water reports. All he said was, 'You've got better documentation than most commercial farms I've inspected.' The inspection ended with a firm nod. And 2 days later, I received the preliminary report, farm clean. Suspected contamination source, HOA irrigation, legacy system with potential industrial runoff. At the same time, Leah sent me a document she'd dug up. Judith Harper, former defense attorney for a company accused of water pollution in this region back in 2010. Reading that line, I understood. She didn't build that fence to protect the neighborhood. She built it to bury her past and to make a profit. But this time, she wouldn't just be forced to tear it down. She'd never get the chance to build another one again. I used to think a property deed was the strongest weapon I had. But it turns out, the truth is the atomic bomb. And the first bomb? It was delivered right to my door, by someone I never expected. It was Stuart Brennan, the HOA vice president, an accountant who'd always stayed silent at community meetings. That evening, he knocked on my door carrying a yellow file folder, looking like a man who just betrayed the mafia. "I don't have much time," he said, glancing over his shoulder, "but you need to see this." I opened the folder. First, an internal HOA meeting transcript, scribbled in the margins. Objective: pressure Ryland to sell land to merge into a commercial development plot. I froze. Next were invoices. The fence installation company was owned by Judith Harper's brother-in-law, paid double the market rate using the road maintenance fund. Then came the next bomb, a plan to issue fake citations against me for unauthorized commercial use of land, even though the board had never officially voted on it. "How long has she been playing dirty like this?" I asked. Stuart clenched his hands. "Since the beginning. I opposed the fence, but Judith said she had connections at City Hall and could make anything disappear." Then he handed me one final page, his handwriting shaky. "Proposal, back tax, Ryland under a new commercial oversight fee. An unprecedented charge to establish grounds for asset seizure if unpaid." I looked at Stuart. "Why are you giving me this?" He looked me straight in the eye for the first time. "Because I was wrong not to stop her earlier. And because it's time this ends." The next day, I called Leah. "You want to put Judith on the front page? I've got an entire treasure chest of ammo here." 2 days later, Leah's second article exploded. Headline: "HOA in hot water, from fence lines to laundered funds." This time it wasn't just the fence. It exposed shady internal transactions, misuse of HOA funds for personal spending, and, most importantly, a secret deal with a real estate development firm. The fallout spread like wildfire. Residents flooded in, asking me, Leah, and even Stuart for answers. An old man named Tom Harrison, whose wife has multiple sclerosis, shared that Harper forced his family to remove their wheelchair ramp because it violated architectural harmony. An elderly woman, 35 years in Maple Glen, stood up in the crowd gathering outside my house and said, "We used to grow vegetables here. This neighborhood was once farmland. And now, the HOA bans chili peppers." There was no doubt anymore. This was no longer a personal battle between me and Judith. This was a movement. Judith's camp didn't stay quiet. 2 days after the article, I received a violation notice from the County Environmental Department. Fake paperwork, blurry stamps. I called the department. They'd never sent anything. The director even said, "Looks like someone's using our name to intimidate you. Bring it in. We'll investigate." At the same time, Leah uncovered a detail that made me sit up straight. Judith Harper, in 2010, served as legal counsel for a chemical company, the very one found guilty of contaminating water near the current HOA development. She might have known the HOA's runoff system was leaking chemicals and put up that fence to silence me, the one person with organic certification who was unknowingly purifying the neighborhood's water. The next morning, the county environmental inspector returned with full lab results. My farm, 100% clean. The HOA's storm drain, contaminated with 15-year-old industrial chemicals. Culprit? Traced back to a defunct industrial zone where Judith once worked as legal counsel. Everything was clear now. Judith built the fence to drive me out, filed fake violations to distract everyone, used the HOA as a shield to cover her scheme. Buy low, sell high, and bury the evidence. But now, we had it all. That night, I sat in the garden, watching my tomato beds come back to life. Leah dropped by, camera bag slung over her shoulder. "You ready?" she asked. Ready for what? To go live. We're going to bring it all into the light. And I knew, after today, that fence wouldn't stop me anymore. It would become the evidence that tears down everything Judith ever built. Wars aren't won with just weapons. They win with timing, and I knew exactly when to strike. One midweek evening, while Mrs. Harper was standing in front of a full HOA board meeting, still trying to sound dignified, still trying to control the A room with vague phrases like preserving community aesthetics or upholding residential standards, the doors burst open. A courier in a khaki jacket walked in without saying a word. We have documents to deliver personally to HOA chairwoman, Judith Harper. I stood up from the second row. I think you should read it aloud, for everyone to hear. In her hand was a legal notice of damages, drafted based on the 1995 court ruling, Helen Dunbar's victorious lawsuit. I addressed the board. Per ruling number XYZ 1995, any obstruction of legal agricultural operations is subject to mandatory removal. For each day of non-compliance, the penalty is $5,000, adjusted for nearly 30 years of inflation. I looked Harper straight in the eye. As of today, the HOA owes me $106,000. No one laughed. No one spoke. The room fell into a silence as heavy as a gravestone, until a woman's voice broke through. Carol Washington, a board member who'd been quiet for a month. I moved for a vote of no confidence in Chairwoman Harper. Effective immediately. No. Time for Harper to object. Every hand went up. 6-1. Only hers stayed raised. But the chair had already lost its legs. Right after the meeting, Leah released her most explosive report yet. Harper's HOA, enforcer or exploiter. The piece included financial records provided by Stewart, detailing thousands in disguised personal expenses, spas, fine dining, gift cards, road maintenance funds diverted to pay her brother-in-law's fencing company, and the kicker, a land sale. Deal with a development firm, plus personal kickbacks for Harper. The media caught fire. Local news aired animated graphics showing the illegal fence slicing through my garden. They interviewed neighbors, each with a story. A senior was fined for having 3 orchid pots. A single mom threatened legal action because her kid set up a summer lemonade stand. A veteran denied a wheelchair ramp because it clashed with brick. Color. What had once been called the HOA now stood exposed, a tool hijacked for control and personal gain. But Judith didn't go quietly. 3 days later, a tow truck pulled up in front of my house. The driver said I had parked outside HOA boundary lines, planning to tow my pickup truck, even though it was inside my own garage. Only thanks to a neighbor's security camera did I stop that pathetic stunt in time. But I understood. When the snake knows it's dying, it thrashes and bites wildly. That's when I knew what would strike directly at Judith Harper's heart. I returned to the records office to review the full ruling from the 1995 case. I wanted to make absolutely sure there wasn't a single loophole. Left, and there it was. In addition to agricultural access, the easement includes rights to light, irrigation, and prohibits any structure that negatively affects crop yield. All violations must be removed at the violator's expense. And the final line hit like a gavel. In cases of willful violation, fines double every 30 days. I folded the ruling and placed it on my desk. This war was no longer just about saving tomatoes. It was about ending a corrupt regime and rebuilding justice from the roots up. I used to think politics wasn't for me, but turns out, when you've got the truth, the law, and your entire neighborhood behind you, you don't need to campaign. You just need to speak the truth at the right time. That week's HOA meeting was the most packed it had ever been. Parking lot is full. Folding chairs extended to the sidewalk. Seniors brought their own camping seats. Kids huddled in the back, watching like it was an action movie. From the moment I stepped in, I saw it in their eyes. No longer the tomato guy, but the man. who locked the gate back for the whole neighborhood, Judith took the podium. No more forced smile, no more beige power suit. Just a stone-cold face and a voice trembling to sound firm. We cannot allow unauthorized activities to disrupt our community standards. Mr. Ryland's unlicensed business operations. I raised my hand. Sorry, I have a city-issued permit. I have a court-backed easement. Do you have a permit for that 8-foot fence? Silence. I held up a printout. This is the local ordinance. Any fence over 6 feet requires approval. I dropped it on the table. No permit in sight. Leah stood up from the press row. And here is a copy of the HOA's financial report, provided by Treasurer Stuart Brennan himself. It shows over $70,000 in undocumented expenses, including a landscape inspection trip that matches spa receipts from Napa Valley. Gasps filled the room. A woman in the back shouted, "We pay HOA fees so you can get massage therapy." Judith began to lose her temper. Her first mistake. Don't let a bunch of ignorant residents and an unemployed engineer manipulate you. The room went dead silent. I stepped forward. Unemployed? Maybe, but I don't steal from the community to control addiction. Then a soft but steady voice spoke. I moved to remove Mrs. Harper as chairperson immediately. It was Carol Washington, a longtime board member who'd stayed quiet through every storm. Per HOA bylaws, Section 4.3, if there's clear evidence of unethical conduct and financial mismanagement, we have the right to call a vote of no confidence. No objections. Hands raised. 1. Harper again, the only vote in her favor. The wave had flipped the boat. Mrs. Harper was removed on the spot. The very next morning, a team of volunteers and a professional crew arrived to dismantle the fence. Each section of wire mesh fell. The neighborhood erupted in applause. There were flutes, lemonade, cookies, even tears. I walked Kelly out to the garden. We looked at the tomato rows rising again, sunlight draping them like quiet metals. Mrs. Donovan came by with a basket of pepper seedlings. "Mark, got time to grow something spicy now?" I smiled. After what just happened, I'm only growing. Spicy! Leah showed up with her camera. Anything you want to say to everyone watching? I looked straight into the lens. If they plant fences to stop us from growing, then plant an entire forest behind them. Because when one person stands up, the whole community takes root. And when I walked into the house, I saw an envelope slipped under the door. No address, no name, just a single handwritten line. That gate once split my garden. Thank you for opening it. I smiled. Helen Dunbar never really left. 6 weeks after the fence came down, Maple Glen was no longer your typical quiet suburban neighborhood. It became a symbol. People no longer referred to it as a gated community. Now they called it Garden Glen, the birthplace of the largest HOA reform movement in the state. And me? I went back to doing what I love, growing, teaching, and rebuilding what Harper once tried to destroy. I expanded the garden, hired 2 unemployed neighbors to help, gave away the 10x10 plot, once the fiercest battleground, and turned it into the Helen Seed Library. Any resident could stop by, take seeds for free, or trade in new ones. An elderly lady who used to cry out of fear of the HOA was now planting carrots on that old patch of land. The new HOA board, with Carol Washington as chair and Stewart as treasurer, abolished every absurd punitive regulation. The Restoration Fund, reclaimed from unauthorized spending, was used to fix internal roads, build a playground, and best of all, create a community garden for everyone. Kids from a nearby school started coming in for field work. I taught them how to compost, propagate, and test soil moisture with their hands. They loved it. One 7-year-old said, "Mr. Mark, I think tomatoes smile when the sun shines." I laughed. "You're right. They smile with their scent." Leah, the reporter who documented the whole journey, no longer carried a camera. She became the editor of the community bulletin, and she visited my place more often now. Kelly teased, I think even the oldest tomato plant in the garden blushes when Leah shows up. Then one day, I got a letter from the State Agricultural University. They wanted to include Maple Glen in their curriculum on sustainable urban development. I looked around the garden at the kids running around. The tomato bushes and nodded. Every seed carries hope, but when planted in the right place, it becomes a legacy. What about Harper? After the investigation, she was charged with counts of embezzlement, counts of financial fraud, counts of abuse of power, and one unprecedented community backlash. Her brother-in-law's fencing company was heavily fined, had its license revoked, and was forced to repay every cent to the HOA. And the final blow? The city rejected all commercial development proposals on neighborhood land. Instead, they officially declared Maple Glen the first urban agricultural preservation zone in the county. People once said I was crazy for turning my backyard into a farm. Now they send applications to join the Grow to Live program we just launched. That night, after I finished tidying up the garden, I sat down with a cup of hot tea. Kelly placed her hand on my shoulder. Leah sat across from me, reading. A page from her new manuscript, The Unlocked Gate, Memoirs of a Tomato Grower. We laughed, quietly, peacefully. And as I stepped into the garden once more, I saw something no one could ever lock, sunlight shining through the leaves, as if the earth was grateful. I picked a ripe tomato, its scent rich and sweet, and took a bite. It wasn't about victory. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about money. It was about what Helen Dunbar said 30 years ago. If they build fences, we plant seeds, because fences can fall. But life doesn't. Some battles aren't fought with weapons. They begin with a gate, a voice, a person brave enough to say no. This story isn't about me. It's about Helen Dunbar, the woman who held on to land when everyone else was selling. It's about a community that once stayed silent, then one day stood up. It's about a new generation learning how to touch the soil, plant a seed, and wait for it to grow. Judith Harper lost, but we won, with persistence, with the law, and with a belief that goodness still has a place to take root. If you're ever cornered by something unjust, some fence built out of fake authority, just remember, sometimes to remove a fence you don't need to tear it down. You just need to plant around it until it disappears into the forest.